Hey everybody, we are back again. We are talking about from debtor to better, the details of debt and how to get out. We've been working on this for quite a while now, since the beginning of the year. We have been focusing on Debt-Free 2019, really trying to help people to navigate this mess of debt that they often find themselves in because they've either made poor choices or had life happen to them, or just yuck, they've lived the normal life because normal is in debt and broke, and we're trying to get out of that. So we're today in video 17. Can you believe we've been 16 so far and we're in video 17? And today we're talking about debt and the law. And I know that doesn't sound really exciting or interesting, and it doesn't necessarily excite me either a lot of times, but do you know how refreshing it is to know what your rights are and what the law is around a particular subject if you're in the middle of a mess related to that subject? It's very encouraging to know the truth and the facts and how something works. So today we're going to spend some time on that. Now, as always, before I jump in, I'm going to jump back and tell you, hey, don't forget to do your homework, because last time we talked about your credit report, and I didn't care a bit about what your credit score was, but it was important to have an accurate credit report. And your homework was to go pull your credit report. You do that at annualcreditreport.com. You get the credit report that you want, or all three, and make sure everything is accurate. So that was your homework. Today, we're going to jump into the law. Now, I am not an attorney. I am not a professional debt collector anymore. I am not blah, blah, blah. I'm not a professional in this field that you can trust as somebody who knows all the details, okay? I don't know your state laws. I don't know all the federal laws. The point of this video is to make sure that you understand and know enough that if you're dealing with and trying to navigate debt and there are some legal considerations or concerns, that you have a good starting point, okay? So I'm not trying to give you an end-all be-all. This is not a law class. This is strictly a discussion on how you can deal with debt and the law and know some of your rights if you are dealing with debt, okay? So with all that disclaimer out of the way, I'm going to talk about a few specific things. Now, again, I'm trying to do this from a standpoint that it's not super boring. There are really 4 laws that are really, really impactful if that you are in debt. So directly related to those of you who are currently in debt, especially if you are in collections. So if you're past due on any debts, then anytime that comes into play, there are some laws that really impact what a collector can and cannot do to you, with you, for you, threaten you with, all that kind of good stuff. So most of what I'm going to talk about is from the perspective of collections. Now, if you happen to have any debt whatsoever, then this may be helpful to you as well, because 1, you might fall past due if something happens. 2nd, you may have a friend or a neighbor or a coworker or someone at your church who is dealing with this, and you can be an encouragement to them, okay? That's the point of everybody paying attention to this video today. So there are a lot of things that go on legally when you take on a loan, whether that be a credit card, a car loan, a house loan. That's why there's so much dang paperwork. And one of the things that is applicable to all of us is the Credit Card Act of 2009. Credit card is like this big, it's Credit Card Accountability and Responsibility and Disclosure Act. Anyway, some big old thing. But if you noticed around that time, if you've had credit card debt long enough, then all the credit card companies now say, hey, if you pay your minimum payment, here's how long it's going to take you to pay it off. And guess what? You can only pay this little bit extra, and it will guarantee that you'll pay it off this much faster. Those little disclosures that end up on your credit card statement, that's a result of the Credit Card Act of 2009. The other thing that act did was sort of make sure that you can't have negative payments. In other words, you've got to stay ahead of the interest. Your minimum payment has to be at least enough to pay part of the interest and the balance. That one applies to all of us. But since we're talking specifically about debt, we're not going to focus on, hey, we're going to pay minimum payments. No, we're going to go past that. However, again, if you start to get into a mess with debt, then you need to know that you do have some rights. That's the importance of knowing some of these laws. So really, I'm going to focus on 3. Fair Debt Collection Practices Act is the big one, or the FDCPA, Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. That's the big one. It's been around since the 70s, and that's the one that governs a lot of the collections that happens out there. The second one is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. That actually rolled into what we were talking about in the last video about your credit report and the fact that it should be accurate. The third one is the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act, or FACTA, and that has some things in there as well. So that's what I want you to do first, and this is going to be your homework assignment number 1. I want you to do it even with you, while you're with me now, or after the fact, and then go back and surely write these things down. But Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, Fair Credit Reporting Act, and the FACT Act, or the FACTA if you prefer. Those 3 are the big laws and rules that really drive how collections has to behave, or what they can and cannot do while they're trying to collect against you, okay? So let's talk about FDCPA first. A lot of times you don't even think about this kind of stuff, but if you get a phone call from a collector, they have to call you within a certain amount of hours. They can't call you at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's not legal to do so. They can't call you at midnight. They can't call you at 11 o'clock. Fair Debt Collection Practices Act came along in 1978 as a structure for collectors to use in being fair and using appropriate tactics. So for instance, if you get a phone call from a collector and they say, if you don't pay me today, I'm going to sue you. Well, unless that collector is an attorney, they can't do that. There are things that they can and cannot do. If they call you at 10:30 at night, they're breaking the law. And the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, or FDCPA, sort of gives them the outline that they have to follow. I'm looking at the notes straight from my book here. On page 76, it says hours of contact is covered there. The use of, and that's actually, if you want to know, it's 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. in your time zone. So if they call you before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m., they're breaking the law. Use of profanity or abusive language. Now, I was a collector, and I probably should say this now, and I've told this in earlier videos, but I was a debt collector for about 6 years. I didn't love the job, but it taught me a lot. And so I'm speaking from personal experience when I know what these laws are and how you have to follow them, okay? So if you're a collector and you're not following these rules, shame on you, because they are not only rules, they are laws. The problem is these laws, these rules, they get broken every single day. And that's why if you're in this predicament where you're trying to fight your way through a bunch of debt, that you should know your rights. So FDCPA, if you're in debt, you need to know FDCPA well enough to understand what it does or does not do. And it's this massive, like, insanely boring document to read, but the bullet points are very useful. So the hours of contact, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. in your time zone. The use of profanity or abusive language. You might gather that probably in my days as a collector, I heard some curse words, but I wasn't allowed to use them. And I couldn't be abusive. I couldn't say, well, you deadbeat loser, pay your bill. No. Most people, by the way, who are past due are not deadbeat losers. They've had life happen to them. FDCPA dictates what I can and cannot say as a collector. It also determines whether or not I can call you at work. So if you've given me permission, I can call you at work. Actually, unless you tell me I can't call you at work, I can call you at work. So those kinds of things are going to come into play with FDCPA. Misrepresentation. Remember how earlier I said I couldn't call you and say that I'm going to sue you? Well, I'm not an attorney. I can't necessarily give you those things that only an attorney can do. And cease and desist. I have to honor a cease and desist. So in some states, if they tell me on the phone as a collector, don't call me anymore, then that has to be honored. However, in every state, if in writing you say never call me again, ever, 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 then that has to be honored. And that's driven by the FDCPA. So those laws, those rules, if you're not past due, they don't really apply to you because they're not trying to collect. You're paying your bill every month. It's no big deal. But if life happens to you and you get past due, it's very useful to have that information. So there's the first big one, FDCPA. Now I'm also going to pause a second. Hopefully I've gotten enough of your attention to point out some of these rules and laws. All of these rules and laws apply to third-party collections. Now what is a third-party collector? If you borrowed the money from, I'll pick on Bank of America just for a second. I've never worked for them, but Bank of America. If I borrow money from Bank of America and Bank of America starts calling me, they are a first-party collector. They worked the relationship with me, so the rules don't apply quite the same to them. However, most of your collectors, first-party or not, are going to follow these rules. Okay? So a first-party collector is someone who you borrowed the money directly from them. A third-party collector is you didn't pay the first party, so they sold that debt to someone else, a third party who is now trying to collect. All third-party collectors have to follow these rules, okay? That gets a little confusing. I explain it a little better in the book, but the general idea is if you are past due and you're dealing with a collector, you have rights, and most of them are tied to those three laws that I mentioned. So FDCPA covers a lot of that. Now, that's the big bullet points. It's a very lengthy legalese-filled document, but that gives you a general idea. FDCPA basically says, here, if you're a collector, here are the rules that you have to follow. Now, you can go on the FTC website and look up the whole thing if you want to. If you want some good nap time reading, then go for it. But I would encourage you to Google FDCPA rules or something along those lines. There's a good Wikipedia article, although Wikipedia is not always the best source. It's a pretty good one that summarizes for you in that case. Then we move on to the FCRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and the FACT Act, or FACTA. Let's talk about those. The Fair Credit Reporting Act works pretty closely with FDCPA, and it provides the guidelines for the appropriate use of your consumer information. You are a consumer. How can your information be used? Well, especially, how can it be used to credit reports? So, Fair Credit Reporting Act. How can your credit information? Yeah, okay, that one's pretty obvious, right? But think about it. When you take that one and you combine it with the FACT Act, which stands for Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act, I can't remember that one, so I had to look that one up. If you go to look at the annualcreditreport.com, like I gave you in the last lesson, if you go look at that website, the reason that the reports exist as they do is because of fair credit reporting and the Fair and Accurate Transactions Act. So when you look at those two acts together and the way they work together, then that bears out that not only is the information that's going to be there going to be relevant, it also needs to be accurate. So when I talked to you last time in the previous video about what to do if your credit report wasn't accurate, well, those right there that I discussed in the video, and those two rules right there, those two laws dictate how you can go about a dispute. They dictate how the reporting can be done. They dictate how long a report stays active based on a certain activity. So for example, the FCRA, this is where the bankruptcy piece comes in. We've not talked about bankruptcy yet. That video is coming. But if you file bankruptcy, how long does it stay on your credit report? How long does that hurt you in the future? So I'm not proposing that you file bankruptcy. I'm not a proponent of bankruptcy. Generally speaking, I think it's a bad idea because the Bible's pretty clear that only the wicked borrows and does not repay. But I also understand that if you're millions of dollars in debt and you're never going to dig out, the point of bankruptcy is to give you a fresh start. So how long does a bankruptcy stay on your credit report? Well, the Fair Credit Reporting Act indicates and dictates how long that reporting can last. So a bankruptcy, Chapter 7, again, we'll talk more about this in a future video, 10 years from the date of filing. A Chapter 13, 7 years from the date of filing. Tax liens, judgments, delinquencies, all those kinds of things, that is going to determine or be determined by the Fair Credit Reporting Act how long those stay on your credit report. So again, if you're maybe going to go get a mortgage or you're trying to clean up your credit and you're curious of how long that bad stuff's going to stay out there, the Fair Credit Reporting Act is one of those things. That's a great reason that you have the opportunity to learn these things because, again, you need to know your rights. The biggest thing that the FACT Act did, in my opinion, was establish the requirement for credit reporting agencies to provide you a free copy of your report. Now, it does more, but that's the biggest thing as a benefit to us that it does. So I told you I don't care about your score, but I do care about your report. And this is almost a continuation of that same video because I want you to understand why it's important. You want it to be fair, you want it to be reasonable, you want it to be accurate, and there are laws that govern how that works, what shows up, and how long it shows up. So those kinds of things, basically, how long can somebody look at your report? And then the other thing the FCRA does is who can look at your report? Did you know that a lot of people may want to look at your credit information? And did you know that you probably don't want them to? Because actually, if you have somebody that starts to pull credit reports on you, it actually hurts your credit score for a little while. It actually starts to look negative on you for a little while. So there's a difference in a soft hit and a hard hit. There's all these different things that go on behind the scenes. So again, it comes down to, are you in debt? And if you are in debt, you need to know what rights you have, especially if you're in collections. So I could spend lots of time here, and I debated on how much time to spend, but I have had lots of people say, I need help navigating this. Well, I don't want to make it complicated. I want to make it simple. So here again, as we wrap up this, what could be really long video, I'm going to tell you again the rules you need to know. You need to, if that you are in debt, in debt and trying to figure out what your rights and laws are that you really need to know about, you need to look up the FDCPA, the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. You need to look up the FCRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And you need to look up the FACT Act, or the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act, because those three big ones right there are going to help you know, first off, what collectors can and can't do, what rights that you have as a consumer with your credit information, and what rights you have to access it, and what rights other people have to access it, and for how long. And then the last one that I mentioned, but I mentioned it first in this video, is the Credit Card Act of 2009, because it's in response to what happened in 2007 and 8 with all the banks becoming overextended and lots of people basically saying, hey, money's easy to get, so I'm going to overwhelm myself with debt, and the problems that brought on. So now the government said they would try to help. Notice the eye rolls. The government tried to help by establishing some requirements for the credit card companies to allow you to see how long it's going to take you to pay off bills, and to never allow you to pay, only that you're never going to be able to continue to go up and up in your debt level as long as you pay minimum payments at least. So that's sort of the way those are laid out. So there are other things that are laid out in there. I mean, the Credit Card Act also covers that they can't raise your credit limit without giving you advance notice, because that's part of what happens in your credit report. They can't give you a vague explanation of how your minimum payment is allocated. They have to tell you where it goes and how it goes. There's stuff. Another big one that came out of that one is targeting of teenagers. There were a lot of rules that got put into place. So again, if you learn these 4 rules, these 4 laws, and really understand what they are, then you will be well on your way to being informed on how to deal with debt from a legal perspective, okay? There's lots of legal stuff that's out there. There are lots of people who think they need a lawyer that don't. There's lots of people who don't think they need a lawyer that do. So my advice to you is this: go research for yourself, learn those laws, and decide if you're ready to navigate that mess or if you need some help. If you need some basic help, reach out to me. I'm glad to help you. Glad to answer some basic questions, knowing that I'm not an attorney. And if you need more detailed help, I can hopefully help you to say, maybe you ought to check with an expert on this one as well. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. We're going to continue on with some more exciting stuff, because this wasn't the most exciting topic of all. We're going to talk about bankruptcy. We've got a few more things to wrap up this whole series, and then we'll be done pretty soon. But this was an important one that I hope that you don't skip over. And if you stuck with me this long, then good for you, because it's some good stuff to learn. So have an awesome day. We'll talk again soon. And until then, let's keep working on that debt. Let's get rid of more of it. All right? Take care.